Appreciate that introduction, Rich. Love the work that y'all are doing at SEBA. I was involved in SEBA from nearly the very beginning when it was in a tiny little conference room in a hotel, and now it's 87 gigawatts and counting, so it's pretty exciting.
Pretty impressive.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about load growth, which is the topic that everyone's talking about. And the graph was really illustrative. I mean, it shows that obviously in the past we've built quickly and we've grown the electric grid. But when you look at the last 20 years, that's not the situation. We've had relatively flat growth. And I'd just love to hear your perspective leading a utility. What has it been like? What has it been like going from what it was 3 to 4 years ago to what it is today?
You know, it's been an extraordinary period of time where I think we're in a unique period of transformation. But I also want to make sure that we don't underappreciate the transformation that has taken place over the last almost 50 years. So if we think about the utility industry, we exist to deploy very large-scale capital investments, debt, equity from Wall Street and other capital providers, significant amounts of insurance, to actually a public good. And we've been doing that for over 100 years. In the last year, 2023, the utility industry, investor-owned utilities, invested $170 billion into the grid. 2/3 of those investments, 67%, went to clean energy and clean capacity. That's about 26 gigawatts of clean energy in 2023 alone. If we were just thinking of the state of California, that'd be about 80% of the installed capacity of renewables serving the state today. And like California, the rest of the industry is about 40% renewable. And today, we have lower carbon emissions than we had 50 years ago. So while we have tremendous growth coming at us, we have had tremendous transformation at each one of the decades if you look back through history. And so if you think about technology, technology is really transforming our society, but it is energy that is powering that transformation and powering society. It's a remarkable time, and it's really fun to be in this industry.
Yeah, it sure is. And I'm just curious, I mean, how do you think about this also in terms of just Rich's title of his talk was the opportunity of load growth. Do you see it as an opportunity or do you see it as a problem?
Absolutely, and I should turn and ask you this question because the issue really is not about how fast we grow, but how well do we grow. So do you think, when we look at the customers in this room, do you think the customers in Silicon Valley, the hyperscalers that are driving much of the growth, and for my company alone, our industrial footprint, which is largely technology-based, quarter on quarter in the third quarter grew 16%. Year to date, just under 10%. Will that growth undermine our customers' commitments to clean energy?
Well, yeah, that is a good question. I think it's a concern that we all have. And I remember, I was fortunate enough to be present at the creation of a lot of Microsoft's commitments over the years. And I do remember sitting in a conference room in 2019 talking about our 2030 target. And there's a lot of stuff we didn't know at that time. I mean, this was pre-COVID, this was pre a lot of the supply chain issues, this was pre interconnection queue delays, and so the world has definitely changed. But the one thing that encourages me is that the depth of commitment has also increased. And I mean, Rich talked about the 84 gigawatts. I mean, clearly the tech industry were sort of anchors in helping that, but then created a massive tent to invite tons of other industries in, which was super exciting. And then you look at what's happening with new nuclear, right? I mean, you have the tech industry now sort of anchoring what we hope is the advent of the rebuilding of the nuclear industry in the United States. It's going to take a lot more than what we've seen so far, but it does sort of bode well for the fact that we can still have these, in spite of the headwinds that we're facing, we can still have really audacious goals. And so it's exciting to see that happening. I think where I get concerned is the stuff that's actually going to make a difference, which is frankly kind of boring, is sitting down in a room with utilities, talking about how we make incremental investments, talking about how we get efficiency out of the existing system. I think there tends to be this tendency to sort of go to the corner cases when we have a big problem like that. Well, the answer has to be we just need SMRs. Or the answer has to be, what I hear all the time is, well, data centers have to go off grid. They can't rely on utilities because utilities are too slow. And that really frustrates me because all you're doing is you're solving corner cases of the problem. Whereas the actual problem itself is all that messy middle in the 80% that we're actually going to get work done with real utilities and spend time thinking about regulation and rates and tariffs and how we appeal to commissioners and how we also appeal to the existing ratepayers, because that obviously is a huge concern. And so, when I talk to utilities, I really do lean in on this issue, and I want to get your thoughts on this too, on how do we partner? Like, how do we actually work together with these customers that are desperate to get as many electrons as they can, as fast as they can, still want them clean, but there's this competitive pressure to grow and build. So I'd love your thoughts on how do we, and I tend to, in the work I do, tend to largely represent the big data center customers and folks that want to plug in GPUs and build data centers. How do we work together?
I think it's interesting that both of us are on stage here because you have a depth of energy background, but you've worked for a tech company. And I came out of the tech industry into a utility and the energy industry. So it's sort of interesting that we've been at the intersection of both of these worlds. One of the things that we've done is we've worked a lot in parallel. You think of software and tech, you're now running a startup and a lot of innovation. And you think about utilities, which is fundamentally is infrastructure. And we have a lot to learn from one another. The speed, the innovation, the competitive tension of technology, the ability to iterate continually for innovation and for results. Coming together with learning about how to do siting and permitting, how to do infrastructure, how to work with local, state, federal governments, how to weave these things together in a way that works for the environment and works for communities. There are very few industries that are as in touch with communities across this country as the utility sector, really making sure that everyone is brought along in this transformation and everyone benefits. Not only do clean energy resources, we just brought on, in conjunction with NextEra, a wind farm in Montana, bringing tremendous economic advantages to that part of the state. That all interconnects into a substation connected with a coal plant, serves customers on the West Coast, and that has tremendous economic advantages for every single one of those communities. And with data centers that are fueling this processing, they're also bringing advantages to local communities and rural parts of this country that have seen very little economic development and are hungry for new roads, better schools, improvements to their clinics. It's a remarkable time when really everyone can be brought along. And I think that working together and really understanding the intersection of our industries is remarkable. But how do you think about what the government has done? We were just talking backstage about this unique period of time. How do you think about that fuel of the financial portion that we're seeing coming out of the federal government?
Oh, it's massive. I mean, it's hugely supportive when you think about what the government has done in terms of providing, as you said, that fuel, that sort of economic incentive to build new things, like to build. I mean, that's what's underlying a lot of what we're doing in nuclear, right? It's how we're deploying capital for batteries and obviously with IRA and what it's also doing to bring manufacturing back into this country. So fueling that as well. So that is so essential. Where I see though the missing piece is still on the commercial side of it. Like how do we? So when I think about how we're solving these problems, I mean, there's technical pieces, right? We need new technology. We need to keep growing our pipeline of long duration batteries and grid enhancing technologies. There's the regulatory piece that we're talking about. Well, we still operate in sort of a regulatory environment. But then the last piece is that commercial structuring, that actual, like, at the end of the day, someone's got to sign a contract. And when I talk about nuclear, I really see nuclear as a commercial problem, not a technical problem. We know how to build an AP1000. Like, we've done it. Yay, Southern. They did it. They showed us we can do it. The commercial piece is what's keeping it from getting done. Like, how do you match that risk-taking of, well, who's going to share in the cost overrun? And, and so the government is doing, I think, in a lot of ways, everything it can to provide the right sort of economic incentives, but we still have these commercial barriers. And one of the things I want to really explore with utilities is how do we take something like a tariff that in some ways it can be very rigid. It's like, okay, well, this customer is a big customer, I'm a big customer, we pay the same amount for electricity, but I have different needs and interests than maybe this customer has. And so, do you think there's ways to alter the commercial structures between utilities to create incentives for certain classes of customers that are maybe willing to pay more money to get power sooner, right? And maybe there's ways to leverage some of this nascent technology that maybe doesn't make sense for you for another 5 years in sort of the normal structure, but can we create structures that actually incentivize you to spend more money, which you of course want to do and want more rate base. So I'm just curious your thoughts on that. How do we unblock some of that government money to invest in technology to accelerate investment and delivery of power to these customers?
Well, first, let's just sort of level set on this amount of government money, because what we're talking about is probably the single biggest change in our economy since World War II. If you think about the IRA, $650 billion, far in excess of what was originally contemplated and probably likely to grow, irrespective of who is in the White House. We also think about the IIJA, and that piece around SMRs and technologies that you're talking about. Just a company like ourselves at Portland General, we are working on over $2.5 billion of projects associated with federal grants. 2 are on the transmission side, 1 is on the green hydrogen side. Right here in Silicon Valley with NVIDIA, we have a $50 million grant to deploy smart grid technologies with NVIDIA, Portland General, and Utilidata to bring that smart interconnectedness to us. We also have contracts with many of our customers where we're taking the value streams of capacity, their ability to be interrupted. Large language models, as an example, use tremendous amount of electricity, but they can be interrupted to benefit the entire grid. So today, if cloud cover comes over the beautiful San Jose area where we are, all the way down to, say, Southern California, you'll see water flowing through hydro facilities in the Pacific Northwest. You'll see wind technologies coming, delivering power into this area. We're right now receiving solar. You might see natural gas facilities come up and balance the grid. We're operating in an enormously interconnected way, but being able to interconnect customers to bring value to the grid so that utilities can bring value back to those customers. We do that with a number of customers today through our standby distributed energy programs, but also with customers where we really integrate their operations into what we do. And that takes a level of partnership and discussion that probably is new to very different kinds of industries.
Well, I love that you make the point about the interconnectedness of the grid, because I think when I talk to folks in the industry, and again, they come with, well, the utilities are too slow, so we're going to go out and build our own power plants and do our own thing. It's like you fail to realize that the challenge that we have, particularly when we're talking about things like AI data centers, these are grid scale facilities, and they only are going to get solved with grid scale solutions. They're far too big to be islands from utilities. You need the entire Western grid to support multi-gigawatts and tens of gigawatts of build out in this region. And so I love that you bring that point up, and I think as customers or as someone representing customers, we want to be helpful in that narrative of saying, hey, we know that the only way this is going to get done is that if we work with utilities and we recognize their constraints and their incentives, and they have to deliver reliability at reasonable rates, and they have to think about things like equity, and they have to think about it making investments for their shareholders as well, but they have to balance all those things. And so I love that perspective, and I hope that we can work together collectively as an industry to achieve these goals.
I'm really hopeful, because some of the things that have really created remarkable change in our industry from before the pandemic, through the pandemic, to after the pandemic, has really been to take innovative new technologies that we work with several companies and are talking to many more in Silicon Valley in this area as we hook in electric vehicles, as we balance the loads, we serve customers. And so I think the potential is really huge as we think about the future. So I'm pretty excited about the next couple of years in this industry, and I think the transformation is going to be far in excess of what any of us can imagine. What do you think is going to happen in the next couple of years?
I love the optimism, and with utility CEOs like you, that makes me even more optimistic that we can do this.
And I'd say partners like you, Brian, who are great to work with.
All right.
So great. Thank you very much.